Yeah, yeah. Have everyone come in. Sure. It's raining outside, huh? Yeah, I didn't close it. No. Okay. All right, let's get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulullah wa ba'd. All right, let me share the screen. Here we go. Yes. Yes, we can. Alhamdulillah. MashaAllah.
And it's a good thing.
Absolutely. Best place to be.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Especially nice to see young folks.
Absolutely. Disliked actions. Okay. Inshallah, here we are. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So we left off at disliked actions, and we are in week 6.
Sorry.
No worries. So what we've done is we've adjusted the time of the class to be 6:45 to 7:15.
Okay.
So it's 30 minutes, inshallah. Let me put this on. Yes. Makes it easier. It makes it easier for people, inshallah. So, okay. So disliked actions of prayer. So we talked last time about invalidating prayer. So what breaks your prayer? Right? If you lose your wudu, breaks your prayer. If you turn away from the qibla, the direction of prayer, it'll break your prayer. If you're speaking or laughing and talking in the prayer, except saying subhanallah or something like, which is remembering Allah, it's going to break your prayer. But itching, yawning, wiping your nose, scratching, thank you. Scratching, yawning, wiping your nose, turning your phone on silent is not going to break your prayer. Okay, so those things will not break your prayer. And you should break your prayer if there's some type of danger or you need to go to the bathroom or something along those lines. So, or your child is running up and down the hall and distracting everybody else. Yes, you should. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Some people, they think, no, I can't. I'm in the middle of prayer, but you're messing up everyone else's prayer. So yes, you should actually break your prayer and put them next to you, and hide them next to you if needed. All right. So now we're on disliked action. So what is disliked? We talked about a little bit about this, but these things, you should not be doing them during prayer, but they're not going to break your prayer. One of them is looking around. So if you're looking around, you find people, they're praying in the middle of prayer. You see them like looking around, looking at like the dome or something like that. You're not supposed to be doing that. When you're in the middle of prayer, you're supposed to be concentrating as much as you can. So looking around is disliked during prayer, but it's not going to break your prayer, right? But you shouldn't be doing it. Number 2, playing around with something. Some people, they play around with their beard. Some people, they're playing around with, their clothing or something like that. Should not be playing around when you're in the middle of prayer. But if you do some movements or something like that, it's not going to break your prayer. It just falls in the category of unnecessary movements. Rushing through your prayer is disliked. You should not be speeding through your prayer so quickly. If you're hungry, you should eat first. If you need to go to the bathroom, you should go to the bathroom first. If you're tired and you need a nap, you should take a nap first. So what happens is the reason why people rush through their prayers is usually they have to do something else or they just don't care so much about the prayer. If you care about the prayer, you should try to time it where you're not focusing on doing something else, right? Get your food first, go to the bathroom first, take a nap first, and then time your prayer that you can actually focus properly so you don't need to speed through it. The next one is wearing improper clothing. So there's 2 types of improper clothing. If you're not covering yourself to the minimum requirement that we talked about, then your prayer is invalid. But like you're praying in your underwear or something like that. But if you're praying and you're covering the parts you need to cover, but what would improper clothing be? Like if you're going to wear, like your pajamas that you'd never wear outside in front of anybody else, it's better to change into something where it's not like, you know, it's clothing that you wouldn't mind being seen in, right? That even for Fajr, if you can, yeah. If you put something on top of it, yeah, that's yeah. No, that's fine. As long as if you were like outside, somebody saw you, be like, oh, I'm okay with that. You know, my neighbors see me taking out the trash or whatever it is. Yeah. So it's better because the etiquette, you know, in front of Allah, you don't have to dress up like you're dressing up for Eid, but you should wear kind of like proper clothing. Otherwise, it's slightly disliked. Mm. Yeah, that should be fine. So just as long as you're not wearing the gown itself, as long as it's being covered, that should be fine. Yeah. So some people, they like, some guys, they come in their tight pajamas or something like that. That's probably not appropriate for prayer, right? But it doesn't break the prayer. It's just considered to be disliked. And then there is the place where you pray. So you shouldn't be praying in a bathroom, and you shouldn't be praying in a dumpster. So a bathroom is a place where it's dirty. A dumpster, like where there's trash and all that stuff, is just dirty, but it doesn't break your prayer either, right? So the prayer is valid, but it's disliked. You should choose not to pray in places like that. And obviously common sense places, like you don't stop on the freeway on the side and you start praying like on the, you know, the in the side of the lane, because it's pretty dangerous. So you don't pray in a dangerous place. You don't pray in a dirty place, like the bathroom or like a dumpster, but it doesn't break your prayer if you did. Okay. Yes. So graveyard is similar, right? So you should not be performing prayers in a graveyard as well, in general, unless there's a need to do so. So if there's a need to do so, it's fine. But that's also considered to be like, it's just not appropriate. Okay, so it's disliked to pray in a graveyard unless you need to and you can't go somewhere else. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so these are the disliked actions of prayer. Any questions on this? Okay. All right, next is group prayer. Okay, so when you're praying in a group, it's called the jama'ah. And jama'ah is something that is encouraged in Islam. So as many prayers, like whenever you're next to another Muslim, you should try to pray in a group, because you have option basically. If you're next to another Muslim, you haven't prayed, they haven't prayed, you both need to pray. You say, instead of us both individually praying separately, we should combine together and we should pray together. So that is something that Islam has encouraged. There's a greater encouragement for praying in a group for men than there is for women in particular, because of the idea of a masjid. So there's a masjid, there's a mosque. And the whole purpose behind making a mosque is so that there can be a gathering place where people can come together. So you have really three options. You can pray by yourself at home or somewhere else in a park, wherever it is. But if there's people nearby, you gather together and you pray as a group. And then there's the third option, is you go to a mosque, which is like the go-to place where people are going to be praying together, and you know that they're going to be praying together. So in order of importance, praying in the mosque is the best. Praying in a group, not in a mosque, is the second best. And then praying just by yourself is the third best, right? You fulfill your obligation. So there is this concept of, you know, coming together and building a mosque. Wherever Muslims are in the world, there's other Muslims there, they should build a masjid, right? If you're the only Muslim in the entire area, there's really not much point in building a masjid, right? It doesn't make sense. But wherever Muslims went and wherever Muslims go today, you're visiting somewhere and then you decide, we're going to stay there. And there's a few other Muslims, they should come together and they should build a masjid. And the purpose of the masjid is to be praying together in congregation. So historically, men have a greater responsibility of praying in a group. So we're not only talking about the Friday prayer, we're talking about the daily prayer of praying in a group. And what's happened, for certain social reasons, many scholars throughout history have put restrictions and said, hey, certain type of women shouldn't come to the masjid to pray on a daily basis during this time and during this time. because they were concerned for either their safety, because when you were traveling like at nighttime, early morning at Fajr time, it's dark. Maghrib and Isha time, it's dark, and there was a lot of danger. So they would say, you know what, women shouldn't travel to the masjid during these times because of the danger involved. And then they also came up with another thing, and they said, well, certain type of women should come to the masjid, and certain type of women, it's better for them to pray in their house. So they said elderly women or very, very young women, like little girls or something, they can go to the masjid. But those who are like marriageable age and stuff like that, they shouldn't come. So what happened was that there was this idea of age and, potential whatever, relationships or, distractions or whatever it is. And number two, there was the issue of safety and security. And what happened is there was a scholar by the name of Ibn Hazm. He's a very great scholar. He came and he said, look, the scholars have, with all due respect to them, they have exaggerated a little bit on these restrictions. And what should happen is during our time, and he's talking about like 1,000 years ago, when he lived in Spain, is during our time, we don't have that type of danger and we don't have those type of restrictions. So if during the Prophet's time, the women used to go to the masjid and they didn't have this many restrictions, we shouldn't have that many restrictions either. But today, it's even safer relative to what existed during Ibn Hazm's time. If you're taking a car, you're going to drive somewhere, and then you're going to park in the parking lot of the masjid, then you're going to walk. You don't have that danger or that concern. So generally, I think today the opinion that should be followed is the women are also encouraged at the same level as the men being encouraged. The only difference is that women may have to tend to the family needs or something like that. So they don't have the level of responsibility that the men have for going for Friday prayer, and the same level of responsibility that they have of going for the daily prayers as well. But both of them are equally encouraged. You're okay. Yes. I'll take questions in a moment, inshallah. Let me see. Actually, no, I will take questions now. Okay, go ahead. So it wouldn't get a sin, but if she can make it to the masjid and also fulfill the household responsibilities, then there's no reason to stop her from going to the masjid. Right. Right. Okay. And again, if you live far away from a masjid, then it's going to happen that you can't make every single prayer inside the masjid. But what used to happen, and what used to happen is people used to live next to a masjid. So they were able to walk to a masjid. It would just take a few minutes to get there, and you're able to get there. And if they lived further and the city started developing, what they did was they would build little masjids called musallas. And every place, every region would have like a little musalla where they're just a place where people gather to prayer, but they wouldn't do any other activities or anything like that. So if you go to Egypt, if you go to like Syria, if you go to like different Muslim countries, you will find large masjids where all the activities take place and Jummah prayer takes place. And then you'll find like little local musallas, which don't even have Friday prayer. But everyone goes there daily. In every little neighborhood, there's going to be like a prayer, a place of prayer. Now, that's, I think, a good model that Muslims in the West should start adopting, but they don't have that right now. So many times people will live somewhere, they don't have a masjid that's nearby. So it's understandable. What they can do instead is try to get your local Muslims who live on the same street as you or live like down the street from you. Say, hey, let's meet together in my garage. Let's pray together as many times as we can, or at least get your family together and then pray with your family inside your house. Okay, so that's the importance of coming together, building a masjid, praying in a group, and why we do things like that. Okay, other questions on that? Yeah.
So this is a question from the women, like,
Hmm. Hmm.
why husbands have like separate entrance where the women are not seen by the men. Women feel comfortable that way. They don't have to walk across all the way from where the men are. And they have a separate entrance, they get to pray. I mean, I think it's like, it's just a fair thing to say. I mean, personally speaking, I'd like to go pray in the masjid. But that's an issue. Like, that's where you kind of have to go past the men and like, kind of past the men, like, men's section. So I was just saying this is a suggestion that having a separate women's entrance, where the women are coming, nobody sees them, they get to attend the congregation.
Hmm.
And they get to have a thing as well on the side.
So I think most there are many. So there are many masjids in the world. I think most masjids in the world that have a women's section, they usually have a separate entrance for women. And what I usually hear is the opposite complaint. The opposite complaint is, why do we have to have a separate entrance, which is like around the back? Why can't we just go from the exact same place, right? So this is what I hear quite a bit. What happened during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in the masjid in Medina, is that they used to have a separate entrance for men and women afterwards. They separated the entrance, but they were on the same side, right? So it's not like you had to go around a back alley or around a different, room or something like that. So if you're referring to just in theory, yeah, in theory, that's a good idea. You're referring to like this masjid, do you count this as a separate entrance or you don't? We have a separate entrance. Oh, okay. So you're referring to some other places. Yeah. So what the issue with the other place is that there's no separate entrance, you mean? You're saying there's no separate entrance? Oh, you're saying for oh yeah. So you're saying for Fajr prayer? Oh. Mm, mm,
It just, I always like and fear people
mm,
having to walk, and I was even like
mm,
just felt very awkward. And
mm.
but anyway, I'm just saying that
Yeah, the nobody seeing you, I don't know if that's I don't know if that's practical in all situations, but in terms of having a separate entrance, yeah. Yeah, you just gotta ask them to unlock it. Yeah, that's really all it is, I think. Yeah, inshallah. Okay. Any other questions on group prayer? Any other questions on group prayer? No. Okay. Then, well, part of group prayer is calling of the adhan and the iqamah. So because there's a group prayer and people are encouraged to pray in a group, something has been instituted called the adhan. The adhan is the call to prayer. Now, the idea of a call to prayer or calling people is something that existed in other religions as well. In Judaism, they had a horn that they would actually blow into and it would call people for prayer. The Christians have historically had a bell and they would have like a bell tower. And if you go to like many of these Christian countries, the old churches, they still have this bell and keeps on ringing throughout. So in Islam, uh, the Prophet, peace be upon him, and Allah, did not want to copy having a horn, did not want to copy having a bell. So instead, they used the human voice to call the adhan, to call people for prayer. So the purpose of the adhan is like an alarm, which basically reminds you and tells you that, hey, it's time for prayer. Everyone should start coming, and it's time for the group prayer or the time for prayer is entered. So the adhan is recommended. Okay. Recommended means that you should be doing. Muslims should not abandon giving the adhan anywhere. But if you don't do it, it's not sinful for you. Right. So if you don't call the adhan, it's not. But what happens, unfortunately, is that there are places where there's a Muslim majority population and they don't call the adhan out loud. And that's very unfortunate. Yeah. So one of the beautiful places like in Istanbul, beautiful place where every single of the 5 prayers, you hear the adhan being called, right? And what it does, it reminds people that, it's either time to wake up or it's time to stop your work and you should pray. Whether you can make it to a masjid or whether you're going to pray in your, hotel room or your business or whatever it is, at least you have this call that's going throughout the city. You find that in Mecca, you find that in Medina, you find that in other places. But there's many places where there's a Muslim majority population or overwhelming Muslim population, and they've abandoned the call to prayer. And that's a very serious thing, right? So they should not be doing that, because the call to prayer is it's like a sign of Islam being present in a society, right? So it's something it's a beautiful thing. There's going to always be a small percentage of the population that says, well, we're not Muslim, so we get bothered by, let's say 95% Muslim majority population, but then 5% saying, but we're not Muslim, we don't want to hear that call to prayer. So yeah, but Christians still ring the bell. in majority Christian populations, even though there's still, not something else. And you have to hear all sorts of other sounds, and you have to hear loud Harley Davidson motorcycles, on the road and things like that. So if you can hear all those things and you're allowed to, have that, why can't you have the call to prayer when it's a Muslim majority population? So the adhan is something that is pretty important. Now, Imam Muhammad, who was a student of Imam Abu Hanifa from the Hanafi school, he says that if you're praying your prayer at home, you can skip the adhan and you can skip the iqamah. But if you're praying inside of a masjid, you should not be skipping that call to prayer, even though it still falls in the category of recommended and it's not a requirement. You're only allowed to make the call to prayer when the prayer time has entered. You're not supposed to make the call for any prayer if the time is not entered. So if somebody says, hey, let's make the call to prayer at 12:45, but the time for Zuhr comes in at 12:50, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to wait until the time has entered. When making the call to prayer, the person who's going to do it is going to stand and face the direction of prayer. This is recommended. If they turn in the wrong direction, their call to prayer is still valid. They're supposed to take their index fingers, put it in their ears so that they could raise their voice louder, and they're going to make the call. So the call to prayer is, you say, Allahu Akbar, which means Allah is the greatest, Allah is the greatest. Allahu Akbar. The same thing again. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I bear witness that there is no God besides Allah. Then you repeat it again, second time. Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Then you repeat it a second time. Hayya ala salah. And then when you're saying this, you have your hands in your ears, or your hands can be down to the sides. You turn your head to the right. Now, the reason why you're turning your head to the right during this statement is why? Who knows? You're calling people to prayer. So the one is you're making a declaration. This one, you're actually addressing the people. So by addressing the people, you turn your head to the right. And you say, Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasul. No, sorry, where were we? Hayya ala salah, hayya ala al-falah. You turn your head to the left now when you're making both of these, and you do that twice. You say, Allahu Akbar, 2 times again. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. So this is the way to call the adhan, and there's supposed to be the pauses at the way that I explained it, and the combination of the 2 statements when you're making the call to prayer. So this is the wording. You're supposed to raise your voice very loudly, and you're supposed to lengthen the call to prayer so that it's said kind of in the way that I just said it. When you're making the Fajr call to prayer, you're supposed to add 2 more phrases. So after you turn your head to the left and you say, Hayya ala al-falah, you say, As-salatu khayrun minan nawm, 2 times, which means that prayer is better than sleep. Why? Because people are sleeping around Fajr time. So this is designed to wake people up. So what used to happen is that everyone was able to hear the call to prayer in Medina. And when it's being called, the people who are still sleeping and they haven't woken up and they're listening to the adhan and they're thinking, man, I'm so tired. Maybe I should just snooze a little bit longer. And then they're hearing prayer is better than sleep. Basically means, so get up and don't keep sleeping. So this is something that it's recommended to be added to the Fajr prayer. Now, a lot of people, they're not used to this because they don't make it in time to hear the adhan for the Fajr prayer, even if you make it for the Fajr prayer. So what happens is, if you happen to be the one who's calling the Fajr prayer, you might forget because you're not used to hearing this. So this is a good reminder for people who already knew but forgot, or people who did not know, that the Fajr adhan has 2 added statements to it. Okay, so that's the Fajr prayer, adhan, call to prayer. Then there's the iqamah. So the iqamah is what I translate as the call to commence, or the call to start the prayer. So the adhan is to call people to prayer and give them enough time to make wudu get ready, walk to the masjid, drive to the masjid, and get there. The iqama is for people who are already inside the masjid. Maybe they're talking to their friends, maybe they're reading Quran, maybe they're doing something else. And now it's the call immediately that the prayer is about to start right now. So that's the purpose. It's like another alarm. It's like a second alarm. You have like one alarm that says, hey, you got like 15, 20 minutes before your prayer. This is the alarm that, hey, it's about to start right now. This is like the 30-second alarm, like, hey, we're starting on time, and this is when the prayer is going to start. The iqama is also recommended. So if for some reason somebody forgets it, prayer is still valid, but they should not be missing it. The iqama is not supposed to be called until the imam is ready. The imam is the one who's going to lead the prayer. Until the imam is ready to start the prayer, the iqama should not be pronounced. So this is a big problem I see sometimes. A person will go and make the call the iqama, and then when the iqama is done, they look around, they're like, so who's going to lead the prayer? Anyone? Who should lead the prayer? It's like, you should have thought about that before you called the iqama. So the person who's going to call the iqama has to get the signal from the person who's going to be the imam that, hey, it's okay to call the iqama now. It's very important for that to happen so that you don't get stuck in thinking now who's going to lead the prayer. So this is the iqama when the imam is ready. What is the wording of the iqama? I'll take it in a moment. There are two ways to call the iqama in terms of its wording. One way is to say exactly the same thing that you said in the adhan. So you say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala falah, Hayya ala falah. And then you add two more statements. Qad qamatis salah, Qad qamatis salah. Which means the prayer has stood up. The prayer has stood up, or the prayer is about to start. And then you say, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. So one way to do it is to say exactly the same thing as the adhan, but you add two more statements to it. There's a second way to do the iqama, and that is the shortened version. And that is you half the statements that you normally say. So in adhan, you say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar 4 times. In the iqama, you say it twice. You just say Allahu Akbar, and then you move to Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah once instead of twice. Ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah once instead of twice. But the Qad qamatis salah is still said twice. Okay? So there's 2 different ways to make the iqama. Both of them are perfectly fine. Whichever one you're used to, it's fine to do that. When it comes to the iqama, you're not supposed to pause the way that you pause in the adhan. You say Allahu Akbar, pause. Allahu Akbar, it's pause. No pauses in the iqama. You're supposed to go pretty quickly without pausing in between. And it's not going to be as loud or as elongated as the adhan. So it's a different way of saying the iqama. And yeah, so that's a little bit faster. And the person who's calling the adhan, usually they used to climb up the minaret, and they used to call from like the tower. So someone who's calling the adhan, they can give it from somewhere else. It's perfectly fine. But when you're doing the iqama, you're supposed to be right there behind the imam where the imam's going to stand. Why? Because if you call the iqama from the minaret, you're not going to make it in time for prayer. Doesn't make any sense. So you should be right there because the prayer is going to start. And the last thing is when the person who's calling the iqama, when he says hayya ala salah means come for prayer. For the adhan, when he said come for prayer, it means usually you could hear it from far away. So it means stop your business, go make wudu and come to the masjid. This time when it says come for prayer, it means prayer is about to start. We're about to get going. That's when anyone who's sitting should be standing up, right? So that's around the right time to be standing up, either during hayya ala salah or by the time you get to qad qamatis salah. Some people, they stand up very early, and that's okay if you do that. Some people, they stand up so late, the whole iqama's done, and then they're slowly getting up and the prayer is already started. You're supposed to get up around the time where you're being told to get up. That's about the right time to get up. All right, then there is responding to the adhan and responding to the iqama. So we'll make this the last point, and then we'll pause there. So when you're hearing the adhan being called, you're supposed to respond to it. Well, first you're supposed to listen to it, unless you have a good reason to not listen to it. So let's say you're reading Quran and you're in the middle of your page that you read every single day. And you say, I don't want to interrupt this reading. You can keep reading because you have a good reason. If you're just sitting there chatting with your friend, better to be like, you know what, let's stop and let's listen to the adhan being called. We're going to listen to it. That's why sometimes if you have a class, sometimes we pause, sometimes we don't pause because we're like, you know, we need to finish this class and it's an important class so we can continue. So it's recommended if you're not doing anything important, you stop and you listen to the adhan. While listening to the adhan, there it is, right? But we're going to finish this class, inshallah. So while listening to the adhan, you repeat exactly what's being said. So it's being said, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. We repeat it. And then we repeat it and we say to ourselves, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Whatever is being said, we keep on repeating what's being said for the first few statements. When you get to the other statements about Hayya ala salah, you're not supposed to repeat it, but instead you're supposed to say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. For the Hayya ala falah, you say the same thing, which means there is no power, there is no might besides Allah. And then you repeat the rest of that. When the adhan is complete, you're supposed to make a special prayer for the Prophet, right? And that is Allahumma rabba hadhihi da'wati tama wa salati al-qa'ima. And you can look up the translation of that. Again, this is supposed to be somewhat of a level 1 basic class. So we get into some details. Some details I'm going to skip. You can look it up, more details later on, inshallah. So that is the adhan and that is the iqamah. Are there any questions? Yes. 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 It's okay. Yes, it's okay. Yes. Yeah, it's okay if the kids are doing it. Yes.
I'm just curious.
Okay. So the question is it allowed for somebody to call the adhan and the iqam? Both. That is what's normally recommended. So normally the person who calls the adhan should be the one who calls the iqam. So it's not required, but it's recommended. And then the question is, can the imam who's going to lead call the iqamah as well? So that's not the normal practice, but they're allowed to. Let's say no one else can do it, and they're like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. So the imam will actually do the iqamah himself. So technically, the imam can call the adhan, the iqamah, and lead the prayer. But the norm is someone should be designated that's different than the one who leads to do the adhan and the iqamah, and then the person who's going to lead is going to be somebody different. Yeah. And if you're at home, you can. Exactly. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Yeah. Apps don't count. Apps don't take the place of the adhan. If they did, then what we would do is in every masjid, we would just put the app in front of the microphone and just do the call. The human voice wouldn't be doing it, right? And then we do the same thing for the imam who's leading the prayer. We just be like, here, you can have a virtual, virtual imam just leading the prayer. Oh, if you hear the adhan on the app and you're like, should I repeat after it? I mean, you get reward for remembering Allah in any way. If that helps you remember Allah, that's fine. But is that considered to be an actual call to prayer adhan? You should not consider a real adhan. And you don't have to do it. Exactly. Okay. All right. We'll leave it at that, and we will see you next week. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum.
Start with six.
Yes, and tomorrow is the Sirah class, inshallah. Oh, yeah.